I wanted to ask Jake Rowe about this. He had a profile on Lawson Lucky as an early enrollee. Obviously, Jake Rowe is not here tonight. You got a stomach bug. But Roos, I mean, I figured you were just covering this guy pretty extensively over the last couple of years.
My name's Jake too. Why not?
Yeah, well, let's just have another Jake do it. But Rowe said that he sees a little bit of a Brock Bowers body type and style of play. This is a premium article over at DawgsHQ.com, so I'm not going to read it word for word. But that's a pretty lofty comparison when you look at the early enrollees that Georgia's going to start putting to work this spring.
Yeah, I think that that's pretty fair. I think that that kind of ended up being the thing over the course of his senior year of high school. Lawson Lucky's not one of those guys that's going to overwhelm you with size like a Darnell Washington would. But, when you're talking about that, kind of 6'3", speedy, really good hands, he is that dude for sure. And so that's where those Brock Bowers comparisons come, man. And I think that that's pretty fair. Like, I'm not going to say the kid is. That's not fair to put on anybody. But I think that in terms of style of play, in terms of frame, then, yeah, those are easy comparisons to make. So Lawson Lucky, I think is going to be I think he has a chance to be a really, really tremendous player for Georgia. And I think that they landed another tremendous player in Pierce Spurlin. But to me, Pierce Spurlin is that longer frame. He's more of an Oscar Delp type. Yeah, right. And I think he's bigger than Delp, if I'm not mistaken. He's a little bit longer.
Roos, my question, you say like, oh, he's a little bit more of that Oscar Delp frame. Like, what to you is Oscar Delp? He's not Darnell Washington.
No, but he's longer than Brock
Bowers.
Yeah. So I tell people this a lot. Like, I interviewed both of them in person. Brock Bowers is probably more like 6'2.5".
Yeah,
he's not gonna overwhelm you with his size. He's stout. I mean, he's built right, but he's not.
And has probably the longest arms, like per capita, compared to his body length.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if you guys have noticed. There's a charity golf thing he played at over the summer, and he was like walking on the putting green. I was like, oh my gosh, he doesn't even like. He could use a putter. His arms are so long. It was insane.
Yeah. To me, Delp is more of the jumbo. I think what people are accustomed to when they think of a tight end. Now, he's not thick in that way. He's not big like Darnell is, but almost nobody is. Nobody's 270 and running at, what Darnell runs. So it's one of those things that it goes – I don't know. They've got guys that kind of fit into all of these molds. There's nobody like Darnell Washington, but that's because I've almost never covered anybody like Darnell Washington from a physical build and ability standpoint. Delp to me is, like I said, kind of the traditional tight end, big, long. Could he stand to put on a couple more pounds? Yeah, probably. Would it slow him down a little? You have to worry about that too. So it's a fine line that you're balancing. To me, that's the Spurlin mold. Lawson Lucky in the Brock Bowers mold. A little bit shorter, a little bit more stoutly built, tremendous blocker, and a guy who's a willing blocker. And Georgia's going to gravitate toward that tight end position for sure.
Well, good stuff. I wanted to give Rowe the chance to hype his article there, but he's not with us. But Palmer Toms, you are, and a couple guys you wrote about over the weekend, Dan Jackson and Javon Bullard, for a couple different reasons. But you did write about Dan Jackson's experience in the safety battle. And as you looked at Jackson's impact over the past couple seasons, it's gotten a little bit bigger, but he's got a lot more talent to compete against each and every year with the way Georgia recruits in the secondary. So how important do you really think his experience can be when it stacks up against some dudes who might have a few more stars by their names?
I think it's huge. I mean, I would, if I'm projecting Georgia's depth chart for the fall right now, I would say Dan Jackson is a starter at safety. And I think that's because of the experience. I'm very interested to see what his participation in spring practice is going to be like. I would imagine he's an active participant, but obviously foot injuries can lag along a little bit longer than you would like, and can some days it bothers you more so than others. So that's a position that you have to run well. Dan is somebody that was a player on that 21 defense. He was a player on the 22 defense. Maybe not necessarily a starter on either of those squads. He started some games in place of Chris Smith in 21 and started the season as the starter in 22 before Malachi Starks reminded us what a freshman All-American looks like. But I think that it's not terribly crazy of an idea to say that Dan Jackson could be the starter replacing Chris Smith this fall while they bring along guys like David Daniel Sisavon and Janelle Aguero. Is it crazy to think that by midseason Dan Jackson is not a starter? No, I think Dan Jackson is going to be a part of this defense. They love playing dime package and having
Dirty Dan.
They love playing that dime package and having a third safety out there. David Daniel did that this year. So could he move from that third safety into a second safety? Maybe. But when everyone was healthy, it was Dan Jackson over David Daniel. So that's kind of what I wrote today. Don't forget about Dan. I think that because with those guys that are injured at the end of a season and not a part of that picture, they often get forgotten. And with a position battle that Georgia has at safety and the talent that they've got there in replacing it, don't forget about the walk-on.
Yeah, Harry Leggy here. I don't know if he's any relation to Dean, but he says Boom is going to play everybody. And I think that's really the function of Georgia's defense that helps Dan Jackson. And that's no disrespect to Dirty Dan. I know that he can hold his own out there, but ultimately, Georgia doesn't have a ton of guys game in and game out who you're like, oh, that's their, blank island. There may be Dan Jackson Island, but Georgia's defense rotates so many people in and out. It's more so, can he stay healthy? And yeah, for him to be a starter won't be a surprise. But I think if Dan Jackson becomes like this shutdown member of Georgia's secondary where you just can't throw on him, that will be an opportunity for him to enter his name into the Georgia history books. But we've seen it on our message board. We've seen it on social media. When that guy's out there, everyone just wants to beat up on him and blame him for everything that goes wrong in the football game and in their personal lives. So we'll see. I'm pulling for Dan Jackson. I hope he can stay healthy.
And I see Tyke Smith mentioned in the comment section as well. We're not forgetting Tyke. Tyke is
a role player.
He's a star, not a star player, a star position. And obviously Javon Bullard, the second guy that I did a profile on today, Bullard is a star player. And I think that they brought in somebody in Smoke Bowie that has a little bit of the ability to play all around the secondary. So do they need do they need Smoke to be a backup at star? Do they need him to be a third safety? Could he be just a dime specialist? I think that it's something that's going to be interesting to see. And I don't think we'll learn a lot about that this spring. I think we'll learn a lot about that early in the season, where we start to see, how that defensive backfield shakes out. Because like the commenter said earlier, Muschamp's going to play them all. Muschamp's, and Janelle Aguero is somebody that is really interesting to me, because I think that, if you look back at this time last year in the spring that Malachi Starks had, it was a lot of tough love. And
is Aguero ready for that?
That was what I was going to say about all of this is, like, I had Dan Jackson kind of penciled in to be the starter last year, just because 98% of the time I'm never going to slate in a freshman, especially at the back end, the defensive back end.
No way, man.
That's a lot of responsibility to put on a young guy. Malachi Starks cut from a different cloth, obviously, and able to step in and do that. Do I think Janelle Aguero cut similarly? I do. But I'm going to go ahead and probably, like you said, Palmer, I pencil in Dan Jackson to be the guy kind of in the early part of the season. Right now, we'll see how spring plays out. But I think that it's a case where you're bringing the young guy along, getting him reps along the way, and then does it surprise me if he takes over the role at some point? No, not at all.
Jack Moreno bringing up Javon Bullard, who cannot be stopped, and he is the third dog that I wanted to profile in this Big Three profile of these Bulldogs tonight. And he had a celebration in Milledgeville over the weekend. Got a key to the city. Palmer, is that right?
Yeah, that's what Logan Cook says.
Look at Milledgeville. I love to see Milledgeville on the map, man. It's a great American town. It's kind of like Athens Junior a little bit. Got a great little Georgia College, the Georgia College environment from the Bobcats. Been there a time or two. Used to work in Macon and WMAZ, and always used to love any opportunity I had to either cover Baldwin or go to GMC. Coach Logan Cook. Is he a coach? Yeah. Logan Cook shared this video of Bullard making his way through town. I thought that was pretty sweet for him.
And it was really cool because I remembered, remember this time last year was writing about Javon and going back, and he was reading to kids at a school in Baldwin County, and being celebrated then. And as I wrote in the piece, he was celebrated for being a part of a national championship team. This year, he was celebrated for being a big part of a national championship team.
Yeah. Defensive MVP in both games, and in both CFP games, and he didn't even play the entire national championship game, right? He got hurt. Yeah. And he did enough to win the MVP.
Talk about development. Javon Bullard, I believe a 3-star guy. I don't think anybody had him higher than a 3-star. Louisville, I think, was kind of the big offer up against Georgia that they were competing with. Dan Lanning led the way on Javon Bullard, and what a get that ended up being for him.
He just had that middle Georgia dog about him, where he was just so tough. And Roos, you've alluded to it a couple times, even before that Marvin Harrison Jr. hit, that he had one of the most physically striking films coming out of high school you can remember.
Yeah, go watch his tape, man. His high school tape was just him unloading on people. I mean, with small guys, and Javon Bullard is a small guy. He's 5'11", maybe. He's on the shorter end of things. So if you're good, if you got that to compete up against, right, you've got to play with some tenacity to catch people's eye. And man, he played. I mean, he's got shout out to our guy Dana Point Dog over on the board. He's got a little bit of that honey badger in him, man. He really does. He comes up and he strikes, and he plays so physically at that size, and that's what you got to do. And I think it's really, really cool to see what it's turned into for Javon Bullard.
Well, Palmer, you mentioned speaking of guys that just aren't, that huge rangy DB that Kirby really seems to like to get, but if you can play, you can't stay off the field. Doesn't really matter what size you are. I don't know how much overlap there will be, but Bullard and Bowie, that when you see what Bullard's been able to do as a undersized guy, you got to think they'll find a way to put Bowie to work too if he can stay on the field.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and with how athletic he is, absolutely think that he can be a big part of that defense. Again, going back to how many guys they want to use in the defensive backfield, fresh legs and having talented fresh legs. He could be cutting into a little bit of the Tyke Smith time.
Yep.
And Tyke also could transition to safety where Georgia has questions. Smoke could end up being more of a slot corner.
Right.
Bullard could, move to safety. I think Jake even had that as his early prediction, day after the national championship game, maybe had it moved him to safety, because a proven guy You've got a couple of proven guys in that slot corner spot. More questions at safety. Do you mess around with it, or do you try it out this spring? Would not surprise me with how much Georgia cross trains in the secondary.
That's one of the just deadliest things about Georgia's team and the way that they operate at every position group is that cross training. They do it on the O-line. They do it in the defensive secondary. About the only place they don't really try to do it. Yeah, they turn Brock Bowers into a running back. They don't really do it too much with the quarterback. But but other than that, I mean, it's just amazing what they're able to do.
I mean, Stetson was a holder. Is that cross training?
All right,
Nicole Hardman played quarterback in high school, so you could say he cross trained a bit.